Hello everyone, so excited to be filming today's video. A lot of people have requested for me to film a poetry recommendations video because I love my poetry and I used to not be a poetry girly, so I want to talk about the poetry that I love. So I have my stack here. I want to quickly talk about how I got into poetry, how you can get into poetry, all of that. But before I get into all of my poetry recs, if you're wondering where my stunning jewelry is from, they are from Ana Luisa Jewelry. I've loved Ana Luisa Jewelry for years. They're long lasting, their prices are great, and their pieces are just beautiful. So I will leave a link to the website and a discount code that you can use in the top of my description. So I used to think that I hated poetry. In high school, I was obviously forced to study poetry and read poetry, and it wasn't really the poetry that spoke to me, especially at the time. You know, I was not sophisticated enough to appreciate some of the poetry that I was reading. I do remember reading some Maya Angelou poetry though, and I was like, that's pretty special. But apart from Maya Angelou, I was like, poetry is so boring, it's not for me. And then in uni, when I started to read more and I was looking for book recommendations, obviously people would recommend poetry. So I started to give poetry a bit of a try, but I still was like, I just don't know if it's for me. But I discovered it's all about finding the poetry that's right for you and also timing. You can listen to a piece of poetry at one point in your life and it can completely just go over your head. But if you hear that same piece of poetry years later, it can be really meaningful. So I think, poetry is all about timing. And there's so many different types of poetry out there that I'm sure everyone can enjoy poetry. It's all about finding the poetry that works for you. So I'm really excited to talk about my favorites today and hopefully inspire some of you to get into poetry if you've been wanting to. So obviously I recommend all of these and I feel like they're all good for beginners, but I will note which ones are specifically good for beginners. So I definitely think Orion Colotto is an amazing place to start. Orion Colotto is one of my favorite people. She is just amazing, and I actually discovered her because I saw this book in the bookstore and I was like, that's beautiful. And I realized she is like a public figure, so I looked more into her and I fell in love with her. And this is one of my favorite books. So this isn't exclusively poetry. This is actually a storybook of people, places, and memories captured on film. So it's a collection of lots of different types of media. So we have photos, we have some essays, some thought pieces, but of course it also has some poetry too. And I just love this book so much. I really feel a connection to Orion and how she approaches life. And I just really love the way that she writes. It's quite simple but beautiful. So for example, we were just kids engulfed in innocence, losing our sanity to vanity. Orion has also written Flux, which is exclusively poetry. And I really love this one. This one mainly focuses on grief and dealing with heartbreak. So let me read one of my favorites. I was too busy admiring the petals that I forgot about the thorns. Seeing nothing but the good in others is both a blessing and a curse. Okay, the next books that I have are all by Amanda Lovelace, and I'm not like absolutely obsessed with her poetry, but I wanted to mention them because I feel like they're really good to get into poetry. And one of my first poetry books I read was The Princess Saves Herself in this one, which I really enjoyed at the time, even being in my poetry hater moment. But I think now they don't hit as much. Maybe that's because I've read more poetry, but I do still think there are some beautiful words, but I wouldn't consider them a favorite at the moment. Sometimes you just need to hear these words. So for example, the princess jumped from the tower and she learned that she could fly all along. So these books are all part of the Women Are Some Kind of Magic poetry series. So the first is The Princess Saves Herself in this one, and this explores life and all of its love, loss, grief, healing, empowerment, and inspirations. Then we have The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one. Now I will say this was quite heavy-handed in the feminism, I think. I didn't love this one as much, so actually maybe I shouldn't even be recommending this. Maybe I just recommend The Princess Saves Herself in this one, because even with The Mermaid's Voice returns in this one, which is the final book in the series, I remember just kind of reading it and being like, okay. Like I do have some tabs of some nice poetry that I liked, but see, the timing thing is so interesting as well, because even now reading this, it doesn't hit me. I tabbed this line: if they treat you as anything less than royalty, then show them exactly what a mermaid witch queen like yourself can accomplish. That feels a little bit too girl bossy for me. That I don't really feel empowered by it. But once again, that could be because I've read a lot of feminist fiction and non-fiction and poetry that something like that just doesn't really hit me. So yeah, maybe I just recommend this one. The Princess Saves Herself in this one. But yeah, I do think Amanda Lovelace is a good place to kind of get started and see what kind of poetry you like. And her poetry is like really accessible, so that is a good thing. Okay, another person I have to talk about is Rupi Kaur. Now, obviously, she is really popular, and even people who don't really read poetry are, I'm sure, aware of Rupi Kaur. And I understand that her, modern kind of simplistic poetry isn't going to be for everyone, and it's not always for me, but there are some words that I really appreciate from Rupi Kaur, so I do really like her poetry, even though sometimes I read a page, I'm like, okay. But I kind of feel like that's the case with a lot of poetry anyway. So I think I've only read 2 collections from her, but this is my favorite, Homebody, and this is all about, coming back to yourself and your body after feeling disconnected from it and feeling safe in your body. So for example, I will never have this version of me again. Let me slow down and be with her. I just think that's really beautiful. Yeah, I do love Rupi Kaur. Thank you. Okay, and then of course I need to recommend Queer Poets of Colour. This is the first major anthology for queer poets of colour, so really beautiful. And this is where I discovered Ocean Vuong, who is one of my absolute favourites. Love you, Ocean. This is also where I read one of my favourite poems. It's Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong, and I just adore these lines. The most beautiful part of your body is where it's headed. And remember, loneliness is still time spent with the world. These words have brought me so much comfort, and I just love Ocean Vuong, one of my absolute favorite people. And I think an anthology is a great way to discover different poets and see which poetry you vibe with. And actually, that's a good reminder because I have a lot of poetry that I love from this collection, so I need to check out the poet's other works. So for example, Marcelo Hernandez Castillo wrote, "Because the bird flew before there was a word for flight, years from now there will be a name for what you and I are doing." Yes, so highly recommend this collection. It's actually called Nepantla, an anthology for queer poets of colour. And of course I'll have all these books linked in my description. So, speaking of Ocean Vuong, love Ocean Vuong so much. I actually haven't read all of his works. I need to read Time is a Mother, which I've heard is amazing, but I've read Night Sky with Exit Wounds, which was phenomenal. So in this collection, Ocean Vuong writes about love and loss, conflict, grief, memory, and desire. It's definitely super unique and also touches on the diaspora experience and war, and it's just so freaking good. I actually can't believe Ocean Vuong's mind exists. It's maybe the rain is sweet because it falls through so much of the world. Even sweetness can scratch the throat, so stir the sugar well. Okay, and moving on to my favorite poet, Rumi. Rumi is obviously iconic for a reason, and I'm so thankful to my friend Tess who told me I should read Rumi poetry. So I first bought this, which is The Essential Rumi, and I'm actually still making my way through this. I've only read this bit, but these was some of the best poems I've ever read. I think I posted a vlog where me and Caitlin were reading this, and I actually nearly fainted because of how much these words affected me. I'll never forget that experience. The power of poetry is just so huge. I just love it so much. So, Rumi writes about everything. Life, love, spirituality, and I feel really connected to the way that Rumi approaches life and the world. So many of my favorite poems are by Rumi, so there are a lot of options I can choose from. As an example, Close Both Eyes to See with the Other Eye is one of my absolute favorites. There is an original inside me. What's here is a mirror for that, for you. If you are joyful, I am. If you grieve, or if you're bitter or graceful, I take on those qualities. Like the shadow of a cypress tree in the meadow, like the shadow of a rose, I live close to the rose. If I separated myself from you, I would turn entirely thorn. Perhaps the world's greatest spiritual poet. Completely agree. Rumi is everything to me. I can't wait to finish this collection. But I've also read these 3 collections. So these are translated by Nada Khalili. And I've read the friendship poems of Rumi, the spiritual poems of Rumi, and the love poems of Rumi. And these editions are really beautiful as well because they are illustrated. Come on, sweetheart, let's adore one another before there is no more of you and me. Okay, another one of my favorites, Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver, I love her. So this is Devotions, and this is a collection of a lot of her poetry. So this is a really long one. And I actually read this over a year. I recently finished it, which was a really special moment. But basically what I did was, not every morning, but I tried to do this every morning. I would start the day with some poetry. So it might just be 1 page. It might be a few pages. It might be 30 pages. But that was such a great way to start the day because it is just really grounding, because what you do in the morning really sets a tone for how you're going to feel that day and how that day is going to go. So I really recommend starting it with some good poetry. Like I said, even if it's just one poem. Last year I had this poetry calendar, which was so amazing because every morning I would read a different poem, but they don't have one for 2023. Well, not one that I could find. I really hope there's going to be one for 2024. Actually, yeah, because I read a lot of poetry from Pillow Thoughts. So that's another collection that I really recommend. I don't have the physical copy, but I read a lot of those poems because of that poetry calendar. I think it was even Pillow Thoughts 1 and 2 by Courtney Pepinell. So that's another one I recommend. But anyway, I love Mary Oliver because she really reminds me of what is important in this life. And she really focuses on the simple beauties in life. She really focuses on appreciating nature, appreciating the small moments. So once again, really great way to start the day, because it's so easy to fall into the capitalism trap and value the wrong things. But reading about the beauty of love, the beauty of being alone, the beauty of just frolicking under the sun was such a good reminder. For example, yes, no. How important it is to walk along, not in haste but slowly, looking at everything and calling out, yes, no. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Oh, there are so many lines I could read out. This is just one of my absolute favorite collections of all time. It is just amazing, and I can't wait to just reread and reread it. Oh! Maybe Mary Oliver is my favorite poet. I don't know. It's either Rumi or Mary Oliver. Like, I was actually quite sad when I finished this collection because it was really the end of an era. Like, obviously when I finish a book, there is some like satisfaction that comes with it, especially if I've been reading it for so long. But when I finished this, I was kind of like, no, I don't want it to end. And obviously I can read more Mary Oliver, but this was just such a moment. And this features Oliver's work from her very first book of poetry, published in 1963, through her last, which was published in 2015. I love it. Okay, and then I have to talk about I Have More Souls Than One by Fernando Pessoa. This is a really short book and I loved it. It's basically about suffering and an intense desire to understand the meaning of life. And I can definitely be very existential, so I really related to these words and found a lot of comfort in them. Oh god, it's actually a bit much. It's actually a bit much at times. Like, if you're feeling really existential, maybe avoid it. For example, when I tried to take off the mask, it was stuck to my face. When I got it off and looked at myself in the glass, I'd already grown old. That is such a terrifying... That's terrifying. See, one of my biggest fears in this life is living inauthentically, and when you finally are like, okay, it's time to be my true self, you're already old. Like, no. We need to cherish each moment and be who we are. Yeah, that is really something. So I love this one. And lastly, I have Her Story by Jay Strelou. And this is actually written by a New Zealand girlie. And I bought this when I was in New Zealand. And they only had one copy in store. It was really a moment. So I bought this in Wanaka in New Zealand. On the 20th of April, I wrote it down. And I read this by Lake Wanaka, which was obviously beautiful. And it was so stunning. So I will always love this book even more because of that memory. I really love this book because it's basically about heartbreak, which I'm very familiar with. I'm sure a lot of us are. So it's split up into 4 parts: her heartbreak, her survival, her love, and her healing. And I really loved that structure, and I think my favorite poems were all in like her healing, maybe, because I have like all my doggy moments near the end. And when I dog ear a page, that means like, this is amazing, I need quick access to it, because obviously I have my tabs, but doggy is like the next level. Which, by the way, I will be filming an updated annotation video soon. It's on my list, I'm sorry. True love will not blame you for wanting too much. True love will offer you the world, and as they watch you hold it, be wondering if they could give you the universe also. So those are all of my favourite poetry. I'm so happy that I finally filmed this video. I feel like I wanted to read more poetry before filming this video, but I realised I actually have a lot to talk about, so I hope you enjoyed. Of course, I would love to know your favourite poetry, and if you have any poetry recs for me. And yeah, hopefully if you're not into poetry, this has inspired you to give it a try. But yeah, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you all. I will have all of my social links in my description, including my Patreon as well if you want extra content. I will also, of course, have Anna Louise's website linked below, like I said, if you want to get some stunning jewellery. I hope you're having a good day or night, and I'll see you in my next video.